Tonight, piling on new sanctions and millions of more dollars in U.S. military aid as the scale of war crimes committed by Russia against Ukraine comes into focus.
It's a deliberate campaign to kill, to torture, to rape, to commit atrocities.
Plus, House of Horrors. A pro-life group claims remains reportedly taken from an abortion clinic in Washington, D.C. shows signs of partial birth abortion, a practice banned in the nation's capital. And
they have become the operational terrorist arm of the Iranian government.
The United States could remove Iran's Revolutionary Guard from its terror list to secure a nuclear deal. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. The world weighs further consequences on Russia for war crimes in Ukraine. Welcome to Faith Nation in Washington. I'm John Jessup. Well, new sanctions handed down today on Russia, including against the two adult daughters of Vladimir Putin. Meanwhile, the Justice Department has announced the first criminal charges against a Russian oligarch since Putin started his war in Ukraine, the DOJ vowing to hold Russia accountable for any war crimes. CBN national security correspondent Caitlin Burke has tonight's top story.
The White House announced plans Wednesday to further isolate the Russian economy, including a ban on all new investments in Russia and severe new sanctions on major Russian banks, as well as against Russian government officials and their family members.
This war could continue for a long time, but the United States will continue to stand with Ukraine and the Ukrainian people in the fight for freedom.
These measures follow new accusations of war crimes emerging from Ukraine. Survivors of the Russian occupation of Bucha, a suburb of Kyiv, detailing horrific scenes of violence. One man telling ABC News that all men under the age of 50 were ordered outside and then shot dead. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky described other atrocities while speaking to the UN Security Council.
They were killed in their apartments, houses, blowing up grenades. The civilians were crushed by tanks while sitting in their cars in the middle of the road, just for their pleasure.
Attorney General Merrick Garland vowed Wednesday to hold Russia accountable. He also announced new Justice Department action to disrupt and prosecute criminal Russian activity, including the first criminal charges against a Russian oligarch since the start of the invasion, and the successful disruption of a planned cyber attack by a Russian military intelligence unit known as Sandworm.
We were able to detect the infection of thousands of network hardware devices. We were then able to disable the GRU's control over those devices before the botnet could be weaponized.
Garland closed with a message for those who continue to enable the Russian regime.
It does not matter how far you sail your yacht. It does not matter how well you conceal your assets. It does not matter how cleverly you write your malware or hide your online activity. The Justice Department will use every available tool to find you, disrupt your plots, and hold you accountable.
Joint Chiefs Chairman General Mark Milley told lawmakers that the Russian war in Ukraine could last years, and he warned that other world powers are also becoming more unstable and dangerous. This morning, the U.S. announced a new partnership with Australia and the U.K. to develop hypersonic weapons, a capability Russia and China already have. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Caitlin. Well, a wrinkle in the renegotiated Iranian nuclear deal from within the president's own party. Some Democrats have joined Republicans opposing a bid to remove Iran's Revolutionary Guard from the United States terror list. It's seen as the last major issue standing in the way of a deal.
America has always done what's best when we work together with our allies to fight terror, protect our citizens, and stand up for democracy. If Iran has proven anything, it's that they can't be trusted. Together, we must address the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran and stand up to their terrorist activities against the U.S. and our allies.
New Jersey Democrat Josh Gottheimer warned Iran and its proxy terror groups like Hamas target Americans abroad and our allies. Well, here with us now is Michael O'Hanlon, Senior Fellow and Director of Research and Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution. Michael, it's always great to have you. How likely is it that the Iranian Revolutionary Guard could be removed from the United States list of foreign terrorist organizations? And Michael, what would that change in designation effectively mean?
Greetings. Well, it's hard to believe that that organization deserves to be, absolved of its sins at this point, or truly designated and thought of in a new way. Maybe there are legal workarounds if we decide it's crucial for the purposes of getting other things we want on the nuclear front. Maybe, for example, you could take them off that list, but also make it clear you still consider them to be a violent group and that you would sanction them in other ways through other mechanisms, or hold out the threat that the next time you get any evidence they're still up to their old ways, which they surely are, that you would again impose sanctions. So if there's that kind of sort of clever legalese that could allow other issues to be worked around, I might hold my nose and go along with it. But we must not believe the Iranians have really changed their ways on this front. This is an organization that continues to foment violence in Iraq, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Yemen, and as you mentioned, with Hamas. So I don't think its character has changed. There may be things you could do to try to push along a negotiation, but of course it's already a close call as to whether this deal would be in our interest, given that many of the timelines for limiting Iranian activity start to expire pretty soon. So I wouldn't push this effort too far.
Michael, moving on to the war in Ukraine, the United States announced additional sanctions against Russia today. How much have they made an impact in thwarting or crippling Putin's war, and how much further can the world go in terms of sanctions?
Well, they've made a big impact in crippling his economy. I don't know that they've yet crimped his style in the war. I think that the Russians have run into a little bit more immediate problems with tanks, burned on and destroyed on roads, with logistics lines being inadequate to the task. It wasn't because they couldn't buy enough oil on the world market because of sanctions. As you know, they have their own oil. It was because the difficulty of the military operation was such that they couldn't find a way around these fundamental impediments. Of course, they're going to try now in the east, and I think they have plenty of weaponry, plenty of spare parts, and plenty of oil, certainly, to keep up the fight for a long time, even with the sanctions in place. So I don't really think we should view sanctions fundamentally as targeting the Russian military machine. That will be a longer-term proposition. The shorter-term proposition is to crimp and curtail the Russian quality of life and the economy, in the hope that Vladimir Putin will recognize it's time to find some way to end this thing sooner rather than later. While there's still some hope of avoiding the worst of the sanctions and maybe getting a few of them lifted.
All right.
But I think the Russian war machine will keep going for a while.
All right, Michael Hanlon in a windy Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Well, a shocking discovery has thrust the spotlight on Washington, D.C. over abortion, prompting Republicans on Capitol Hill to demand a full investigation. 17 GOP senators and 5 Republican members of the United States House signed on to Oklahoma Senator James Lankford's letter calling on the mayor and police chief of Washington, along with U.S. Attorney General Merrick Garland, to investigate reports of possible late-term abortions. The case centers on the discovery of aborted fetal remains reportedly taken from a Washington clinic. The pro-life group that took possession of the remains says they show signs of partial birth abortion, which is banned in D.C. Several of the group's members have been indicted, accused of felony conspiracy back in October 2020. Well, joining us now is Christina Bennett, correspondent with Live Action News. Christina, welcome. Let's start there with one of the stated goals of this group, Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising, is putting the heat on Christians and conservatives that they deem insufficiently committed to the cause. Christina, do you think that's the case, and will it work?
I think that the pro-life activists from Progressive Anti-Abortion Uprising are trying to persuade as many people as possible to stand up for the preborn. And that includes Christians, that includes people of faith. They are trying to set an example and cause people to follow their lead in fighting for the preborn child in whatever capacity that they feel called to do.
Christina, in your opinion, do discrepancies in the story of how the remains were obtained at all hurt the cause and credibility of this case?
I believe the story that the activists have shared, which is that they were at the surgery center and they saw a medical waste truck, and the whistleblower on the truck gave them a box, and inside of the box was over 110 fetuses, which is just so tragic. They were going to be incinerated as medical waste, and they asked him if they could have the box to give the babies a proper burial, and he said yes. And they gave a proper burial to 110 first trimester preborn children, and there were 5 that they recognized that were larger, second, third trimester, and they believed that these babies were killed and possibly through a partial birth abortion. And so they called the DC police. They called the homicide unit and they asked them to investigate. Unfortunately, that has not happened. There's not been an autopsy, but we join in with their cry asking for the DC mayor and the medical examiner to give an autopsy to these children so we can know if this is a partial birth abortion situation.
Christina, in about the half minute that we have left, I know that you write about these issues and you have a personal connection. To what degree do you believe what we're talking about today extends beyond the nation's capital?
The personal connection that I have is that I was scheduled to be aborted at Mount Sinai Hospital, Hartford, Connecticut in 1981, and my mom walked out. And unfortunately, she had an awful experience with an abortionist who literally told her, "Don't leave this room. You've already paid for this," and yelled at her when she decided to walk out and save my life. And that is similar to Dr. Santangelo, who is the abortion doctor at the Washington Surgery Center, in the sense that he also is caught doing things that are wrong, saying that if a baby was born alive after an abortion, that he would not have a baby.
Christina, we're going to have you back on to share more of your story at a later time. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me. God bless.
Well, to the economy and your wallet. While some lawmakers in Congress say gas companies are guilty of ripping off the public, others blame the president's policy for sky-high prices. As the blame game plays out, CBN's Brody Carter shows us how both sides are proposing ways to ease the pain at the pump.
One analyst tells me that even though it may not feel like it, we're entering our 3rd week of declining gas prices. The current national average is about $4.16 per gallon. That's down about 19 cents from recent highs.
The day Joe Biden took the oath of office, the average retail price of gasoline was $2.38 a gallon. Today, it's $4.16 a gallon. In some parts of the country, it has gone as high as $6.90 a gallon.
Lawmakers are butting heads, pointing fingers at who's to blame for gas prices and the nation's 40-year high inflation rate, which sits at almost 7.9%.
This is not a result of Putin's war. This is a result of Biden policies.
Wednesday, Republicans laid the blame at the president's feet.
The president has a lot of people he wants to blame. He has a whole long list. We can go through all of them. He wants to blame COVID, supply chain, energy executives, Putin, all of them. The American people see through it. They're not buying it.
Democrats are going after big oil, investigating the largest producers for price gouging.
The cost for a barrel of oil was $102, and the price that Americans were paying at the pump was $3.70 a gallon. But today, the price of oil is again back to $102. But for some reason, Americans are now paying $4.20 for a gallon of gas.
Others see rising energy costs as a complex and multifaceted issue.
I have the full expectation that gas prices will continue to slowly drop as stations pass along those decreases. There's just a lot of nuances to how gas prices work that politicians don't seem to understand.
Patrick DeHaan with GasBuddy.com emphasizes that gas companies don't set prices because they fluctuate by the second due to supply and demand in the market.
The person principally responsible for the price at the pump is Joe Biden. Here's what Joe Biden promised in the campaign for president. He said, quote, "No more drilling on federal lands, no more drilling, including offshore, no ability for the oil industry to continue to drill, period. Ends." He told you what he was going to do, and he did it.
Some lawmakers say today's investigation on big oil, led by Democrats, is just a show, that the hearing will do nothing at all to improve the financial burden that many Americans are facing. That's still to be seen. Brody Carter, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Brody. Coming up, the booster debate over a 4th vaccine shot Is it necessary? Next. Well, welcome back. Health regulators are trying to develop a strategy for COVID booster shots. The FDA met today to gather information and devise a plan for the future. The meeting comes just 1 week after the agency approved a second booster shot to people over the age of 50. Despite authorizing approval, the FDA only recommended the booster for people over age 65 and said those younger should get one if they have serious underlying health conditions. Most experts expect come this fall, Americans will be offered yet another COVID shot. Well, here with us now is Lori Johnson, CBN News medical reporter. Lori, always great to have you. Let's start with this, the next COVID booster. Your thoughts, what type of COVID shot will the FDA and the CDC recommend for the fall?
Well, John, we're talking about the fall, which is about 6 months from now. It will be October 6th, 6 months from now. So they've got that amount of time to figure this all out. And so that's why they're sort of in this fact-finding mission right now. The FDA, the CDC, the World Health Organization, even Israeli scientists are, number one, trying to figure out if we will need a shot this fall, and it looks like we probably will. And then, of course, the second big question is, what shot are we going to get? Ideally, we would have a brand new one that better targets the variants that are going around, and one that lasts longer, because we know that the ones that we've been getting for the last year and a half have been really not that effective. They start to wane after about 3 or 4 months. But right now, we don't have anything except these ones that we've been using for about a year and a half. Pfizer and Moderna are working on new vaccines right now that target the Omicron variant. But those results from those tests won't be available until May, so we'll look at it at that point. So beyond the fall, it's kind of a question, are we going to get this every year? Are we going to have to go back every 6 months and get a booster? That's still just a big question mark, John.
Speaking of variants, we're seeing alarming COVID surges right now in parts of Asia and Europe, but not here in the United States. Lori, can you explain the discrepancy?
Actually, a lot of scientists are baffled by this because they expected a surge in the United States a couple of weeks ago to follow what's going on in other parts of the world, and we're just not seeing it. So they're saying, you know what? Americans might actually be more immune than we realized. A lot of people may have natural immunity from getting COVID and recovering from it, and of course, people who were vaccinated. And then there are some who say, well, maybe we're not testing that much, and maybe actually we really are experiencing a surge, and we just don't realize it because people have mild cases. One thing we know, though, John, hospitalizations are so low right now. Thank God. They're the lowest they've been since the beginning of the pandemic. Although scientists are sort of being cautious, saying, you know, we still might experience a surge. We'll just have to wait and see. Still so many unknowns about this virus.
So many unknowns, but we'll take that piece of good news that you gave us wherever we can get it. CBN medical reporter Lori Johnson, we always appreciate your time and your insights.
Thanks for having me, John.
Well, when we come back, why Democrats and Republicans in Washington aren't the only ones worried about a nuclear deal with Iran. Welcome back. Well, as we reported earlier, while the Biden administration appears to be on the verge of completing the new Iranian nuclear deal in Vienna, Israel is warning how one part of the agreement might have dangerous implications for the entire Middle East. CBN's Chris Mitchell brings us that story from Jerusalem.
After months of talks, the U.S. pursuit of this agreement could mean removing Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard from the list of foreign terrorist organizations. Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett calls the potential concession dangerous because it involves the world's deadliest terror organization.
The terrorist group, the IRGC, is trying to murder Israelis and certain Americans around the globe. Unfortunately, we're seeing a determination to sign a nuclear deal at almost any cost. including saying that the biggest terrorist group in the world is not a terrorist organization. This is too steep a price.
They have become the operational terrorist arm of the Iranian government, which employs terrorism as a tool of statehood. And that's why we actually designated the IRGC as a foreign terrorist organization.
Former Deputy National Security Advisor for the Middle East, Victoria Coates, sees the IRGC as a menace to the region. As part of the Trump administration, she helped designate the group as a foreign terrorist organization, or FTO.
What was powerful about the FTO for the IRGC, which was groundbreaking, it was historic, we hadn't done that to a military before, is it immediately stopped a lot of the IRGC's commercial activities, which were one of the economic lifelines to the regime in Tehran.
Coates says the Revolutionary Guard resembles a cancer, spreading terror through the region and using proxies like Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, plus international assassination threats. It's also behind Iran's ballistic missile program and its drone arsenal. Any U.S. agreement to remove the IRGC from the terrorist list would supposedly require a promise not to spread terror in the region. Coates points out, after the Biden administration lifted the designation off the Houthis in Yemen, they simply increased terror activities.
So interestingly, as Israel has gotten closer to both Saudi and UAE, they've been talking about this and what happened when the Houthi came off the list and how terrible it's going to be if the IRGC comes off the list. They'll get a lot of money. They'll have freedom of movement again. And we've seen almost for the first time in my memory, a united message out of Abu Dhabi, Riyadh, and Jerusalem that this is unacceptable. And these are three of the United States' most powerful allies in the region. We should listen to them.
If the Biden administration does not listen, many believe allies like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Israel will find themselves targets of one of the world's most dangerous terror organizations. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thank you, Chris. Well, something I thought I'd never say. What does the fox say? Find out next on Faith Nation. And finally tonight, from rats to owls and raccoons, residents in Washington's Capitol Hill neighborhood are no strangers to animal encounters. The latest critter chomping at the bit for the D.C. spotlight? A nesting fox. The U.S. Capitol Police had issued a public safety warning telling people not to approach any foxes. The malicious mammal was taken into custody Tuesday afternoon after 6 people reported nips or bites. A Twitter handle called Capitol Fox issued its own statement claiming the fox's innocence. Sadly, we have to report the so-called Capitol Fox was euthanized for posing a threat to the community. Some sad news there. Glad everyone in the community is safe, though. Thank you for watching Faith Nation. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.